it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing another episode of my deck collection and declutter, and today we are going to be going through this ginormous basket of stuff. So these decks are not really going to be in any particular order. I just have a group of decks that I have thrown into what I kind of consider my fall basket. So it's just decks that kind of resonate with that sort of energy or that I use during that time of the year. So they're in no particular order. We're just going to go through whatever's in this bin. I'm going to see if I want to keep it, if I want to declutter it, and we're just going to make our way through my entire deck collection in this crazy mismatch of a series. So we're going to start with a deck that it's not going anywhere. It's just not. This is my Steampunk Tarot, and it is one of the decks that I have had the longest in my collection. Here's the backs. You can see that it is so lovingly bowed and worn, and I absolutely adore this deck. It was one of the first that I ever purchased. Well, technically it's the second deck I ever purchased, and so it's been a long time favorite in my collection for many, many decades. I've spoken about this deck many, many times, and my love for it and how much I've used it and adore it, and it's still a favorite. I love the art style. I love the steampunk vibes of it. It's just got all the feels, and now at this point, because I've had it for several decades, it also has like all the nostalgia. So it's been around for 20 plus years, I think at this point now, like a really long time. And it's not going anywhere, and it's one that I pull out on occasion, and I like to get into just, for that nostalgia, or whenever I'm feeling the need to connect with this sort of steampunk energy. This deck is just, it's kind of like, it's an everything deck. And we're going to do a little weird thing, because I do have a couple of decks that specifically have some pairings for me. So this time we're going to do a few pairings with it, because in this basket, I do have a couple of decks that I kind of use together. So I've been using, with the Steampunk Tarot, my Alice in Wonderland, the Paulo Barbieri version. This is a fairly new deck in my collection. It's a fairly new deck in general. Here's the backs of this one. This one is bowing too, but not because it's been loved and used for decades. Just, I don't know, poor cardstock, or I think it's because I live in the Pacific Northwest and everything here just bows and warps. I absolutely adore this deck. I do have to use the guidebook if I want to get kind of more of a divinatory style message, which is totally fine. The guidebook entries are great. They're very short and sweet, and I get exactly what I need from them. But as far as pairing it with a tarot, like I've been pairing it almost exclusively with the Steampunk Tarot. And let me just show you why. Because these decks are just amazing together. They make me so happy every time they hit the table. Here we have a Mad Tea Party with the Eight of Wands and the Two of Cups. Again, I don't necessarily need to get into the guidebook for the Alice in Wonderland Oracle, but I feel like I get such a richer reading out of it when I do. So I do tend to pull my two tarot cards in alignment with my one oracle, using this as my main focal point, getting into the guidebook. And the way that these two decks work together, they're just kind of magical. I really love them. It kind of blends the two worlds in this beautiful sort of more like an adult style fantasy, I guess, because even though like Alice in this deck does feature a little bit older, and even though this is a children's story, the artwork in the Steampunk Tarot is not very childlike. It doesn't feature, it features adults. And I love this kind of blend of kind of taking this idea of Alice in Wonderland and bringing it into a grown-up world. Because when you read Alice in Wonderland as an adult versus as a child, it has a totally different energy to it. And I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite stories. It's one I've read multiple times. I read it to my kids. I read it when I was a kid, and I've also read it as an adult, just for the sheer joy of reading it. And I think that these two together just work beautifully for helping dive into the Alice in Wonderland energy as an adult, but still tapping into that childlike energy that kind of exists as that heartbeat beneath the story. And I think they just work beautifully together. Like aesthetically, they're stunning. It kind of reminds me that like beneath all the adulting, there's still play to be had. There's still silliness. There's still wonder in the world. Sometimes you have to look a little bit harder to find it, but it's there. And this little deck combo just kind of reminds me of that, and I absolutely adore it for that. So speaking of nostalgia and pairings, let's talk about these two decks, because while I do use them in their own right and in their own ways, I do often use them together, and there is a reason for that. And again, all the nostalgia vibes. Let's talk about the Labyrinth Tarot first. So this is a deck that I bought really because like Labyrinth was a movie that I grew up on, and like I still watch it. I still watch it at least once a year. To this day, it is one of my all-time favorite movies. Here's the backs of this one. And this is a pip deck for sure. You can see it's kind of like a Marseille style in that way. It's got sort of the wood block artwork. And I absolutely adore working with this deck. I do really like working with pip decks as long as the pips make sense, elementally and numerologically, and then I'm all on board with it. And I absolutely love the majors and the courts in this deck because they feature, characters from the movie, aces as well. And you really get those scenes coming through in the majors and the court cards in this deck. And it kind of helps lend a little bit more weight to those. I don't necessarily like for my cards to always be weighted heavily one toward the other. Like we get enough of the weight through the heaviness or the big picture energy through the major arcana. The minor arcana is more like those, it's the lesser mysteries, right? It's the lesser things. It's the more mundane, whereas the major arcana is more the big archetypal energy. But it really does, when you're working with a pip deck, kind of illustrate that in a very visual way, because this is less visually stimulating than this. And there's a place for that. There's a time and a place for that. And I know not everybody loves pip decks, and I totally understand, because it is a bit harder to work with, especially I think if you don't have a pretty solid frame of reference on what the number and the suit mean to you, then I think it could definitely be a bit more challenging. But I really enjoy working with pip decks when they have this kind of weighted energy, because it really does visually represent the difference between the major and the minor arcana when those cards hit the table in that way. Then I picked up, I don't know, a couple years ago, this Into the Lonely Woods, whenever it was it first came out. Here's the beautiful backs, and I have edged mine in green. I will try to note anytime I have done edging on a deck or any sort of modification. This deck to me, and if you know the Labyrinth movie, this is my Ludo deck. It will forever be my Ludo deck. Ludo is one of the characters in Labyrinth. And he's kind of like this big, like he kind of looks like this. He's like this big monstrosity thing, but he's like so sweet and comforting. And that is 100% what this deck is. It is just full of Ludo vibes for me. And whenever I need that sort of comforting, supportive energy, like that sweet, massive teddy bear, like you just imagine like a 7-foot teddy bear. Like this is Ludo. Like it just resonates with that energy. And again, that's a very personal thing. It's a very personal connection that I have, but I do only use my decks for myself. I do not read for other people professionally. And so it's great when my decks have that sort of personal connection, because it makes it all the more potent when I do readings with it. So whenever I'm looking for this kind of energy, this is my favorite card in the deck. Absolute favorite. All Our Shadows Are Beautiful. This is one of those decks that the guidebook is really nice, but I don't ever get into it. I just like the card image and the message on the bottom is all that I need. But what I love to do with these, and talking about a couple of decks that I just pair together, these two decks for me are absolutely amazing together, because I've got that nurturing, warm, supportive Ludo energy in the center, and it's such a comfort thing. I know that the deck definitely has a kind of it leans more into the, it is the Into the Lonely Woods, so it definitely leans more into that kind of solitary sort of energy. But for me, I don't get that out of it. And I think it's because of the personal association I have with it. It doesn't feel solitary to me. It doesn't feel lonely. It doesn't feel hopeless or helpless or anything like that. To me, this deck feels like it's shining a light on where the comfort lies. like if you think about Ludo as a character, like he's this big scary looking monster thing, but like he's so sweet and like you just want to go up and give him a big ol' hug. Yes, my squishy is totally showing because I get very squishy when I talk about my nostalgia things, right? Squishy when I talk about nostalgia things, squishy when I talk about video game things. That's how my squishy side comes out. Anyway, these two decks together, they're amazing because I feel like I'm getting that Ludo energy through the Into the Lonely Woods, and then I'm getting the kind of more practical messaging that I need through the Labyrinth Tarot. So I can take this as my focal point. Where do I need comfort? Where do I need support right now? And then I could look to the tarot to really help flesh that out. So we have, there is one who watches over you with the Demon and the Ace of Feathers. It's beautiful. And the thing is, when you pair it's great, I'm so glad this came up. When you pair a deck like this, a heavily illustrated oracle deck with a pip deck, it works beautifully because you get all the richness that really focuses in on the oracle card, and then the tarot really becomes like the bones of that, the support to that message. It's kind of like what's underneath, the foundation of it, and then you build on top. But then even when we get, like two majors here, we have all this beautiful, heavily illustrated. This to me, when this comes up, this is even more weighted. It feels like it has more import than when it's just two pip cards. When it's just two pip cards, I'm like, okay, this is cool. It's just like, it's a little thing, right? It's not going to be a huge thing. And that's just kind of the way I personally work with pips versus a really heavily scenic deck. And I look at this and I go, it's not that it has less importance or less weight, but maybe it's just less energy. It's more neutral than over here where this Hermit feels like it has a bit more energy, a bit more vibrancy to it. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. I really enjoy that when that happens because it allows me to really focus on whatever it is that I need to be focusing on. Like here we have the two pip cards. So we're just looking at these two pips, really honing in on and supporting this message of a time to rest. And I just think it works beautifully and I really, really love it. So speaking of fandom decks, here's another one, the Dark Crystal Tarot. Now I have also watched the new show, but I also grew up with the Dark Crystal, right, as a kid. So there's all kinds of nostalgia here for me. One of the things that I'm kind of trying to do with this little deck collection and declutter is also look at decks that do I have a pair for it. Now, not every deck needs to have an oracle to pair with it, right? I don't need to necessarily always have an oracle and tarot together, but that is primarily how I like to work with my cards. And so when I have a deck that I can't pair with it, or I haven't found something to pair with it yet, it does give me pause because then I wonder how universal is it in my collection. Now the Dark Crystal Tarot, again, another fandom deck. This one I do believe, if I remember correctly, is based more on the new series, more so than the old movie. But again, you can see it's by the same creator as the Labyrinth Tarot, so the art style is the same. I think it's beautiful. I love the pips. Again, we've got those fully illustrated court cards and majors, and then just the kind of almost like playing card-esque energy of those pip cards. If I could find one, would be great. There's one. And I think it works beautifully. I have not, however, found the Oracle deck that I want to pair with this. I'll have to think about what in my collection might fit that, and if I don't have one, then that's something that I might give some thought and consideration to. Although, like, to be perfectly honest, with a deck like this, that it's a fandom deck, I very rarely rehome fandom decks because they exist in multiple spaces for me. It's not just about the deck itself. It's not just about the Tarot or the Oracle. It's about the fandom that it's a part of. And so I very rarely rehome those. So this one is probably not going anywhere because it's a fandom deck for a show and a movie that I grew up with and absolutely loved, but I really would like to find something to pair with it. So if you have any ideas, definitely leave it in the comments below. Maybe we'll come across something in this basket. I don't know. But what I'd really like to do with my collection is make sure that, like, for the most part, every deck, every tarot has an oracle and every oracle has a tarot, unless it has a different kind of role in my collection and I use it for other things other than just basic card readings and divination and my usual practices. This one I have edged, by the way, just to let you know. So that's the Labyrinth Tarot, and again, I'm holding on to this one because it is a fandom deck, but I would like to find an oracle that I could pair with it. Okay, as I'm digging through this basket, I'm finding that I did actually start to put things together in pairs, because I do have several decks that I primarily work with together. That's not the case for the whole basket, but there's quite a few of them in here. So I thought we would try to get those out of the way first, because these are decks and pairings that probably aren't going anywhere because they already have a mate in my collection. So the next little pairing is the Divine Nature Oracle deck, and this in this bag here is my Heindel Tarot. Now, let's talk about these two, because honestly, I probably wouldn't keep this deck as much as I think it's beautiful. I probably wouldn't keep it if it weren't for the fact that it pairs so incredibly with the Heindel Tarot. So we're gonna get to that in a minute. And this is one of the reasons why I want to kind of go through my collection, because like I'm looking at it going, is that the only reason I have it, and is that valid? So this is the Heindel Tarot. This is an older tarot deck. It has a gorgeous, gorgeous, huge double book guidebook written by Rachel Pollack, which is wonderful. They were out of print for a while, but I do believe they were re-released, and so you can get them again. This is a gorgeous Thoth-based deck. There's lots of different layerings in this particular deck. We have some astrology, we have the Sephiroths, we have the I Ching, and it's just one of those decks that has so many layers to it that I feel like you could pull this one out and then kind of like pick and choose whatever you're feeling to really dive deeper into, be it the astrological associations or the Hebrew letters, or the maybe the cultural representation that you're seeing through the art or through the cards. And it just has such depth and such a layer. For me, in my collection, what this deck kind of serves as is a connection to ancestor in a like super ancient way. Not ancestor as in like even like blood ancestor or anything like that, not even going back a few generations. Like I mean like caveman, like the ancestry of humanity. And that's what this deck represents for me, and one of the reasons why I've kept it. If I feel like I want to really connect with that deep primal ancestral humanity, this is the deck that I go for. And I think it's because a lot of the art looks like kind of like cave paintings to me. It looks very archaic, and there's, you know, we have like stones and the pentacles, and I feel like it kind of represents the evolution of humanity on a very large scale. Kind of going from the Stone Age up to not quite modern, but more modern sense. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to keep it, because it really does do that beautifully. It's one of the few decks in my collection that I have that really sits very firmly in that space. And so I keep it for if I want to do readings in alignment with that sort of energy. And then I just ended up, when I got this deck, the Divine Nature, for whatever reason, just randomly ended up pairing it with the Heindel Tarot, and it just worked beautifully. So here's the backs of this one. It's got the shiny gilding, which y'all know I hate, but I haven't de-gilded it yet. It's got beautiful artwork. It is glossy, so the cardstock's very different between these two, but they work beautifully together. And this again has that same sort of feel. This feels like it's more of a representation of humanity through art. And whereas this feels like it's more about like culture and like the things that people are versus the things that people create. If that makes any sort of sense. I know, y'all, sometimes the things in my brain, I don't always translate well onto like verbally into what I'm trying to, because I, like, as I've said a million times before, I'm trying to articulate a felt experience, and that's a very difficult thing for me to do. Also, as somebody who's not like super in touch with their squishy side, I definitely struggle with that, but it's something that I'm always working on. Anyway, these two together, like, I just feel like they really sit in this beautiful space together of, again, like I said, it's kind of like the Heindel Tarot represents the growth of humanity on this very grand sort of species scale. And it feels very like practical and mundane. And then this Divine Nature feels like it's like humanity represented through like art. It's like the potential of what humanity can create. And it feels like it taps into maybe like humans on more of a soul level or a spiritual level. And I think that's kind of the thing about these two together that I really, really enjoy, is that it feels like it's taking humans and humanity as a species and looking at them from the inside out, what they have going on in the external as well as what they have going on in the internal. And just for whatever reason, it's just such a beautiful, beautiful pairing. Another deck, that Oracle deck that works really well with the Heindel, is the ones by Claire Mack. I don't have those out here in this basket as part of a pairing, but they do work really well together, just as an FYI. But I really love these two together. They're just a match made in heaven. These are two that I really feel like they're kind of like married in a sense. And in fact, since I've got this pairing, I don't think I've worked with the Heindel with anything else. And I don't think I've worked with the Divine Nature with anything else. They really exist to support each other. And I absolutely love the messages coming through. And they are a unique pairing in my collection. And that's the other thing I'm kind of like looking at as I'm going through my collection and the pairings and the decks that I have, and thinking about what do I use them for and how do I work with them, and do I have other things that sit in that same space. We've already gone through that once where I did some like really obvious ones that, you know, were really obvious to me. Like I have this, so I don't use that. We did that video already. And this one, we're going into more of the nuance of things. Like I may have things that do similar, but do they, you know, cover the exact same thing in my collection. And so that's kind of my goal with this series on the whole, as well as just showing you what I have in my collection. So again, this, like, look at this. We have create between oppression with the 10 of Wands and the Tower. Like out of that destruction, out of that hardship, that is where creation can be born. It's like that whole like the diamond in the rough thing, right? I just love it. I love it. This is a great combo. It's not going anywhere. Okay, so because this video has no idea what it wants to do and what it wants to be, we're also going to do a little playing with pairs. Because as I was looking in my basket, going, do I have any others that feel like they really are a pair that I use as a pair? And while I don't have any others that really like super align, like the first few that we've looked at, there are a few that I'm like, I think those might work together. So let's just give it a try while we're here and going through this basket. So here, obviously, I have the Magical Spirit Oracle. I do use this deck quite often with a lot of other decks, so it's not like, it's not a monogamous oracle in my collection by any stretch of the imagination. And this deck here is the Gentle Tarot. This is an absolutely beautiful deck. This is the linen edition, so it's got the little bit smaller size. I love this deck. It's one of my favorites. I have the pocket one that lives in my bedroom, and I use it quite often for bedtime readings because it just has such a wonderful, sweet, gentle nature to it. And I really, really love working with this deck. It's one of those that I go to when I just really need that gentle, loving, supportive message. And, you know, it's one that's great when I'm feeling a little bit sensitive, when I'm feeling a little bit tender. This is a great one for me to go to, and it just gives me the support that I need, but it does so in a very empowering way as well, and it's just beautiful. I love it. The artwork is gorgeous. I do have the bigger guidebook too, which is amazing, and I do love getting into that. I have also edged this one. It's like hard to tell on camera because it's just like a little beigey color. And then we have the Magical Spirit Oracle, and I've used this one quite a bit for many different pairings. So here's the backs of this. It's, you know, shiny gold gilded, which I hate. Like, y'all know I hate. This deck surprised the heck out of me because I absolutely love it. Like, the artwork is fabulous, and I really like the sayings that are on the bottom and the keywords and the key phrases. But really what I end up paying the most attention to is these clever little things written in the center within the artwork. And I mean, I have thought about actually just trimming it down to the artwork, but I actually kind of like the big brown borders. I know. Make it make sense in my brain, y'all. Sometimes things just work for me when they shouldn't. And even though I hate the gilding, because shiny gilding needs to just stop, in my opinion. Like that just, please take it out of rotation, publishers. Just don't do it anymore. Anyway, I really do like the borders, and I really do like the key phrases down at the bottom. Even though I don't use them that often, I tend to work way more with the imagery and the messaging in the center. I do like having them there, and I do like the keywords, because a lot of times I do like my keyword reading where I'll pull an oracle card and then I will tie my tarot into these 3 keywords. I think I've done a whole video on that. But this deck surprised me because it looks here's the thing. It looks very woo. It sounds very woo, but it's actually really freaking practical and it's really smart, and I really, really enjoy working with it. So I just wanted to see, since I had these two in the basket together, how they would pair together. Again, the Magical Spirit is one that I use for a lot of different decks. It actually pairs with a lot of things in my collection, so I really appreciate that about it. I do love the idea of like having completely monogamous decks, like this tarot and this oracle, just they live together, they work together. Like, yeah, I've been married to the same person for almost 3 decades. Like, clearly I'm into that thing, but I also like the idea of having lots of decks that I can, you know, use for a variety of purposes. And I like having that flexibility in my decks as well. But I thought these two might be interesting together. I just kind of wanted to have a little play. Again, they wouldn't be like monogamous because I work with this one with the tabletop tarot. I've worked with this one with the tarot nuages that we're going to be looking at here in a moment. Those are just a few off the top of my head, but I've used it for a lot of different things. I've used it for daily card pulls. I've used it just to when I just need a message right there in this moment. But I do think these work really well together, and I kind of like them. I mean, aesthetically, I think they fit. They have the same kind of soft, similar color palette and energy. There's a little bit of a sort of vintage vibe to them, and I think it's great. I do like them. Are they like gonna live forever together and never see anybody else? No. They're definitely going to be making their way through my collection with other decks, but I think they work really well together. I do like it. It's a cute little pairing. Since I just mentioned it, let's go ahead and take a look at the tarot nuages. And it's always interesting to me, the decks that I put in bags and the decks that I don't. And there's probably a rhyme or reason. A lot of times it does have to do with the box. I don't mind these boxes. I think these boxes are great, actually. They're a great size. They fit in my baskets just fine, and I don't have a problem with them. These backs are kind of amazing. I love this deck. It is so weird and quirky, and it has like these little imps and these little goblins, and it has such a fantasy energy to it that I absolutely adore. But it also has kind of like this shadow energy to it. So it definitely feels like one that kind of sits in the darker side of things. It feels like it kind of dips into the shadow of the fantasy world and fantasy vibes. There is a whole little like story that goes along with these this place. Here we see the town card. There's a whole like village and story and community that exists within this deck, and I think it is so cool. I really, really love it. It's such a fun one to work with, but it usually does kind of point me towards or hint at kind of the shadowy nature of things, like what's maybe going on in the not even just the unseen, but like slightly chaotic. Like it's got a chaotic energy to it. And like if you've ever seen me play video games, if you've ever watched Lisa and I stream, like chaotic energy is definitely something we lean into. And I really love this deck for that reason. It's like a subtle chaos to this deck that I think is just beautiful. And I love these kind of weird alien looking creatures. Like I said, we have some imps, we have some goblins. I don't know that that's really what they were intended to be. That's just what they look like to me. And they completely exist in the fantasy world. And for me, in terms of a deck that like dips into like fantasy and shadow work, this is it. This is the deck for me. I really love it. It's fantastic. I have paired it with quite a few things. Let's just, while we're playing, because I do have another pairing that's just like, maybe this will work. Let's check it out with the Urban Crow Oracle. It kind of makes me think that maybe it might go with the Tarot Nuages. I guess because it kind of has that sort of chaotic energy too. I have edged mine. This is one that I've kind of gone back and forth on whether or not I actually want to keep it. So we're going to do a little playing with pairs, because again, this video does not know what it wants to be. Is it a deck collection? Is it a declutter? Is it a playing with pairs? It's all the things rolled into one. I do really like this deck. There's something about the crow energy that's just completely chaotic to me, right? And I think that's what makes me think it'll go with the Tarot Nuages, because it's that chaotic energy. Also, like there's a Tucker, and I have, anytime I can make a personal association, even if it's just one dang card, I have a hard time rehoming it, because then I'm like, oh, but it makes me think of it every time that card comes up. and it kind of creates a personal connection for me. And so I thought this one might be interesting. Let's try it. Let's just see what it looks like. This card really feels like it fits in the Tarot Nuages world. Again, like not every deck needs a pairing, but I really love when I can find them because it just makes them all the more versatile in my collection. So here we have Insight between the Eight of Coins and the Magician. Again, I feel like that sort of dark shadow, subtle chaos energy is coming through, and I kind of dig it. I feel like this is like maybe a deck that I would go to when I'm kind of feeling in that that kind of like bratty mood, that like I don't want to mood, but it's like darker than my usual I don't want to mood, right? Does that make sense? It probably doesn't. I have decks that I use that I call like my inner teenager decks, like they're like my rebellious inner teenager decks. They like, I don't want to do my homework style of decks. This to me feels different. This feels like grown-up rebellion. This feels like I am a grown-up and I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, but I got no desire to do it. And I also like don't care. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. There's such a, like this whole deck, this whole pairing has such an I don't give a damn energy to it that I really love, because I feel like it's the type of deck that would give you the message that you need, whether you like it or not, right? Like this pairing, I feel like will tell you what you need to know, whether you like it or not. And I think it works really well, actually. I'm really loving these together. So we have Battle between the Knight of Chalices and the Four of Chalices. I think these are really great. And I may have to keep these in a little pair together. It would be really cool to get some pairs, like I was saying, that I just like know that these work together. Look at this, the Mischief between the King of Chalices and the Empress. Yeah, I'm definitely feeling it. I'm feeling this rebellious, chaotic, but also like hint of a shadowy energy coming through. And I really dig it. I think it works really well. Okay, I'm gonna have to play with these two together. I think I have before, which is I think why it's clicking in my brain that I've done this before, but I definitely want to kind of dive into it a little bit more. And I feel like this time of year, like coming into the darker half of the year, it's a perfect time to do this. Look at this, grief between the Ten of Wands and the Nine of Swords. Yeah, okay, let's not end on that. That's a sad message. Let's not end on that one. Let's see what we get between our two queens. Queen of Wands, Queen of Coins, release. Love it. That's perfect. Okay, so another deck that's living in this basket is my Llewellyn Tarot. And this is my, it is my beloved deck. It really, really is. This is my little trimmed version. I've got multiple copies of this deck. Here's the backs. Again, I've way trimmed it. I've edged it. This deck is so well used and so well loved. And for quite a while, it was kind of like the deck that really represented me. And I worked with on a very deep and personal level, like as in if I were to pick a deck and say this is me in a deck, it would be this one. Now, people change, things change, I've changed, so that's no longer the case. And for me, that's the whole point of tarot, right? Because I'm using tarot as a personal growth tool and a tool to better understand myself and to connect with myself and to connect with other energies in the world around us. And so I think it's fantastic that the decks have changed. It shows the progression of me as a person. It shows me where I was versus what I'm stepping into now. And it's just, as I look through it, there's so much nostalgia in this. I still absolutely love this deck. It's still one of my favorites. There's something that's just so profoundly personal about this deck now because of the amount of work I've done with it. This is one of those decks that I've I carried it around with me. Like it went everywhere I did, and I used it for all kinds of things. I do still use it on occasion, but it does also kind of represent where I was a few years ago, and now I have new decks. And one new deck in particular that I feel like represents where I'm at this point in my life. And I think that's great. I think it's great for my personal deck to change every few years or whenever it needs to, because then it shows me my personal progression through the practice and as I'm learning and growing as a person. And it's showing me what I'm stepping into and how I'm making changes. And that this deck for me will always signify that. So like it's one that's never going to go away. But it's just not one I necessarily always use. Okay, so let's talk about two newer decks in my collection that, whoops, I accidentally used the same fabric. I try really hard not to do this when I make bags because fabric is how I determine what a deck is, because every deck has fabric that I have hunted and specifically picked out that fabric for. And I don't know what happened here. This was a mistake, but it's okay. At least they have different buttons and they have different insides, so I can tell what is what. And in this one, we have my Witch Sister Tarot. Now, this is a new deck in my collection. Here's the beautiful backs. I really haven't worked with this deck that much. I really don't know where it sits for me in my collection or what I would want to use it for. I feel like I have a lot of decks that kind of sit in this sort of imagery. And I don't know, of course, it's by the same creator as the Tower of the Hidden Realm, which is probably another one that I would be in this basket, so maybe I'll grab that. That's currently one I'm using in game, so it's actually out running around. This artwork is really amazing, and I haven't really dove too far into the guidebook yet, but it does feel like it kind of occupies the same space as Tarot of a Hidden Realm, so I would be really curious, but like, look at that. Oh, so gorgeous. I'd be curious to know, like, look at that one. Oh my goodness. And see, then here's what happens, because I look through the cards and I'm like, these are gorgeous. These are absolutely phenomenal. I do believe there's a totally different sort of vibe and energy and tension in these decks. The art feels very similar, and that's because it's by the same artist. And they're like, oh, they're so gorgeous. They're so gorgeous. I just haven't found its place yet. I really, really want to. It feels like it could exist very much in a fantasy world, and I am all about that for my decks and my life in general. So it's definitely one I'm going to be hanging on to because I want to work with it some more, and I want to see where it's going to sit for me, because right now I don't really have a purpose or a real call for it, but it's gorgeous, and I would love to be able to work with it more and to get to know it better. I'm thinking that maybe like fall might be actually a really good time to pull it out and do some work with it, just to kind of sit in this energy. In fact, there's a fellowship thing coming up in my membership that I actually think this deck might be great for. So maybe I'll hold it out for that. But in the meantime, I'm just kind of holding on to it. Still need to spend some time getting to know it. And that's the Witch Sister Tarot. So in this other bag that, whoops, I used the same fabric, is my Triumphy Paradoxical. So y'all, I've been on a journey with Patrick Valenza decks. Okay, I don't understand why the backs didn't change. That really bothers me. It makes my designer brain go a little crazy because like the other things have changed. Like it's just an inversion of colors. Right? The colors have just changed. The artwork is still the same. The colors have changed. This is a Marseille deck. I love the colors. I'm all over the place with this deck because like I do not know what to do with it. I don't know where it sits for me and my collection, but I absolutely adore the colors, and I really do like Patrick Valenza's art style. I've had kind of a love-hate relationship with it on and off over the years. If you've been in my membership for a while, you might remember an incident with the illustrated version of the Triumphy, and like I had a moment that was more reflective of where I was in my life and had nothing to do with the deck. But since then I've come around and I really do enjoy that deck, and I think it's fun and whimsical. But it's definitely proves to me that I am a moody tarot reader, and I definitely work with decks in certain time and spaces. I don't have a clue where this one sits for me. I just think it's fun, and I love the color palette. I do wish the backs were brown. That's such a nitpicky thing because otherwise it's a gorgeous deck. I just don't understand why the fronts all changed and the back didn't, but that's just me, and it kind of makes my designer brain hurt, but it's just a fun one. I don't know. Like, I don't know where it sits. I don't work with Marseille that often, but I think this is a gorgeous Marseille deck, and it's one I'm holding on to because, like, I would like to find something to do with it, something like, not that every deck has to have a specific purpose, but I do like to know why I have a deck, and this is one of those cases where, besides the fact that I think the colors are cool, and the art style is cool, I don't really know why I have it. So, I just need to take some time and figure out what purpose it serves in my collection. Occasionally, just having a deck just to have it is totally valid for me, and I just need to know that that's why I have it. Like, I do have some decks that I have no intention of using, I just have them because I like them, or they exist in a fandom or something like that. I will never use them, but I own them and I'm okay with that. I just need to know that, and I just haven't figured out where this deck sits for me yet. So the next deck is one that is definitely a favorite in my collection. I know I've talked about it a lot, and this is the Northern Animal Tarot. Now, I have done a slight modification to mine. This is the version that I think is the very first version. And it has this beautiful, like, I don't know, book paper quality to it that I know has been changed since then, but this thing is an absolute dream to work with. I actually re-rounded all the corners, so I used my big corner rounder to make the corners even more round on this deck, and I also edged it. And I absolutely love this deck. This is like, if I want to disappear into a loving, supportive, fun, magical, whimsical animal world, like anthropomorphized animal world, this is the deck that I go to. I use this one a lot in the darker half of the year. It just really has that energy for me. I find it to be very loving, very supportive. I really, really enjoy working with it. Funny enough, it is one that does not have an oracle companion in my collection. I know there is an oracle deck, I'm pretty sure there's an oracle deck by this creator. And this is one of those cases where I don't work with this deck with an oracle. I don't know why. It just is the way that I've developed my relationship with it. This deck I kind of work with like it's a storybook. So I will pull several cards out and I will like use it to kind of do like a story-based reading where it's not so much a divinatory message of this is what you need to know right now. It gives me a story that I can really dive into and explore. And there is messaging within that, but that's not really quite the point of it. The point is more that storytelling element. And so this is one of the few decks in my collection, or the few tarots in my collection, that I do use exclusively on its own. I probably have paired it with things just to try it, but really at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, this deck totally stands on its own. It exists in its own world and in its own space for me, and I work with it in a very specific way, so it doesn't get an oracle companion. It doesn't really need one, and it's very specific to the way that I work with the deck. And I feel like this deck just, it belongs on its own. It's its own world, it lives in its own space, and it belongs on its own, and I'm totally okay with that. So this is one of those great examples of a deck that I do not have an oracle pairing for. Will probably never have an oracle pairing for, but I love it and I use it just as it is. It does not need one. The last deck in this basket is another long-time favorite deck of mine, and this is the Modern Spellcasters Tarot. It is the deck that has the most unfortunate name because it really isn't modern and it doesn't feel very spellcastery to me. I have edged it in this like bronzy color. I might have even used Sharpie. This might have been back in the Sharpie days. This to me, okay, this deck has a very specific place in my collection. It is my World of Warcraft deck. It's the deck that I associate very, very strongly with that game, with that world, with that lore. And so whenever I pull it out, that's the frame of reference that I'm using when I'm working with it. It is important to mention that in this deck, there is an elemental swapping between the swords and the wands. So the swords are fire in this deck and the wands are air. I do believe. I might have that backwards, but when we come across, yeah, wands are air. And you can definitely see that reflected in the artwork, right? It's definitely reflected in there. The Ace of Swords is really, really hard to work your way around if you work elementally. I just ignore it. I just ignore it and I read it in the way that I read. It's still, swords are still air to me. Swords still represent the mind suit. Wands are still fire and still represent the soul or the being. And I just read with it in that way. And I completely ignore the fact that the creator intends it to be the other way around, which actually does sit in alignment with magical practice. So it fits if you're working from that framework. It doesn't work, there's that ace, I see it. It doesn't work with the way that I read tarot. So even though this sword is immersed in flames, I would still look at this as the first card in the air suit of the mind. And I can work around that because, man, in my brain, there's a lot of things. Like, this is chaos, and my brain looks like chaos a lot of the time. So I just kind of work around, like a headcanon it, right? We're talking about a deck that I use in alignment with a game and the lore and all of that. Like, I headcanon it. I make up my own rules when it comes to this deck and how I work with it, which is fine because I'm only using it to read for myself. So, like, it works for me, and that's really all that matters. But I know that is a stumbling block for a lot of people with this deck. I just completely ignore it and read it in the way I normally would. But I absolutely love it. It's a deck that's going nowhere. It has the most unfortunate name, but I absolutely adore working with it. It's one that I do tend to use a lot more in the fall. It definitely has fall vibes for me. But again, it's so tied into that association that I've personally made to it, to World of Warcraft. I know there is a World of Warcraft deck coming out. It's going to have to work really hard to compete with this in my brain. But that's the association that I've made personally with it. So, like, it's not going anywhere, and I love it. And it's a great reader. You just got to be able to either work with the elemental associations the way they are, or just completely ignore them and work them in your own way, I think, to really get use out of this deck. That's all that was in this particular basket, which I kind of dub my fall basket, which is kind of decks that sit more in that energetic alignment for me, but don't necessarily get into really deep sort of fairy tale fantasy fall, because I have a whole nother basket for that, which we'll get into. I don't think I did so much in the way of decluttering. I have two decks that maybe I might be a little bit on the fence about. The Witch Sister Tarot, which I'm going to do some work with this year and see how I feel before I decide if I'm going to move it on. And then the Triumphi Marseille deck, only because I just don't know where it sits. So I don't know if I want to keep it or not, but again, it's another one that I'm just going to hang on to for right now. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box of this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.